With the help of Hashem, we are learning Sukah Daf Chaf. God willing, today we will conclude the first Perek and go into the second. We are on Daf Chaf, Amud Aleph. We left off 8 lines from the top of the Amud. We are continuing to explain the machlokes that we have in the Mishnah on Daf Yutes Amud Beis between the Tanach and Rabbi Eliezer about a reed mat. A reed mat, as we explained, because of it being hard, could be presumed that it was not made for it to be laid upon, and yes, made for it to be used as a shelter, as a covering, as a schach, and therefore, being that it's made out of wood, and the halacha is that flat wooden ware is not mekabel tuma unless it was made to be a receptacle, and therefore it's going to be allowed to be used for schach. But there's a ambiguity in the Mishnah as to understand what is Shitas Tanakama, what is Shitas Rabbi Eliezer. Before we'll finish the intro, then we'll come back and we'll share again, we'll chazer the way Rava understood their machlokes, and then we're going to refute Rava's understanding, and we're going to bring a new understanding in the machlokes in the Mishnah. A big part of the daf will be discussing the use of different types of mats for schach. Just as an example, we're going to learn that if a reed mat has a gedafna, which means a rim is an indication that it was made for it to be used as a container. And therefore, yes, it will be rendered, or it will be viewed as a keli, and it will be possible for schach. Versus if there is no rim, we also learned already yesterday, the size, if it's very large, or if it's only made exactly in the height of a person. A reed mat in the height of a person is called a small mat. That might lead us to understand that it was made for people to lay on or for people to recline on, and many other small nuances when it comes to determine whether the mat is makabel tuma or not, whether it's kosher for schach or not. Now the second Perek will begin hayoshein tachas hamita. If someone is sleeping under a bed, issue here is that a person is in a kosher sukkah, but if you are in a oil in a sukkah, then the oil can create a chatzitza. It can interpose you from the sukkah, and you won't be yoytze the mitzvah of dwelling in the sukkah. So there's an obligation to sleep in the sukkah. Then you won't be fulfilling your mitzvah if what you are sleeping in is considered an oil. Concerning a bed, we're going to have a machlokes tanoim. On one side, both the Tanakama and Rab Shimon will hold that yes, under a bed is viewed as an oil. We'll see in the Gemara further qualification for that, and therefore you may not sleep under a bed. On the other side of this machlokes is the Tanach Rabbi Yehuda that says there's absolutely no problem with you sleeping under the bed. And we're going to then go to another machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim, Benegei Hilchas Tuma, where Rabbi Yehuda says explicitly that kol oil she'enoi asui bidei adam, that if an oil was not made by people with the intent for that covering to form a shelter, so there's just a natural oil, sometimes in the ground, there's like a pocket or a cavity or a cave. If it's not made bidei adam, Rabbi Yehuda holds it does not have a din of an oil. And then ultimately tomorrow on Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, we're going to see how the opinions of Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim concerning tumas oil will be brought back and connected to the dinam of an oil by a sukkah, and much more. Again, we left off on Daf Chaf Amud Aleph, 8 lines from the top of the Amud. How Rava explained the machlokes in the Mishnah between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim is the following. When you have a large mat, again, the definition of small is a mat, a reed mat, that has the length equivalent to the height of a person. It looks like it was made for people and for people to recline upon. That's the small mat. A large mat means a mat that's larger than that. So what we did learn, the way Rava explained the Mishnah, that even if you don't know for what this mat was made for, that's called stama. We don't know what the intention was. Then Rava says that everyone will agree that only when you know that it was made for reclining upon, only then is it a keli, only then is it puzzle. If you don't have that knowledge, if you don't know what it was made for, you can assume that it was not made for reclining because it's very uncomfortable. And everyone will agree that that mat is allowed to be used for schach. Where is the machlokes between the Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer by this small mat, more or less the height of a person? Here is where the Chachamim hold l'chumra, that even if it's stama, you don't know what it was made for. Since the height is the height of a person, it's called small. That will halacha will paskin that we have to presume that it was made for reclining, and it's makabel tuma, and it's not kosher schach. And Rabbi Eliezer is the lenient one, which is quite unusual. Rabbi Eliezer holds that by katana, or even by katana, stama is also okay. It's only not okay when you know that it was made l'shchiva. That's the way Rava explained the machlokes in the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer is lenient, and inside the Gemara, Amalei Abaya challenges his chaver Rava. It can be, and he has two refutations. And this is a very important line of Gemara to learn how to learn. Number one, says Abaye, Ihachi. Now he's quoting what Rabbi Eliezer says in the Mishnah, the way we have it in our Gersa. That why does Rabbi Eliezer say, which he does, Achas ketana va'achas gedola, in that order, if by gedola everyone agrees. Gedola is the pshita. The chiddush and the area of machlokes is the ketana. So the way this should have been worded is Rabbi Eliezer should have said, first achas gedola, and then va'achas ketana miboyale. And like Rashi writes, and I'm reading inside Rashi, v'chein darkei hatanoim b'chol makom, dahahi depshitolei tana bereisha. First you quote the area in which everyone agrees to. And then if you hold, which is the case of Rava's understanding in Rabbi Eliezer, that not only is it so by Gedolah, but Rabbi Eliezer holds and the same by Ketana, it's gomen akala lakovet, from the milsa the pshitale to the chiddush. But that's not the order of the wording of Rabbi Eliezer. So that's number one question on Rava. And number two asks Abaye v'oid, I found a brisa where we clearly see that their machlokes is dafka by Gedolah and not by Ketana. And according to the brisa, which is implicit, it's not explicit, we're going to see that Rabbi Eliezer will be the one who's machmer. Now this is the norm. Rabbi Eliezer is from the Talmidei Beis Shammai many years later, but from the students he follows the way of thinking of Shammai. And yes, as a rule, Beis Shammai is the one that's machmer. The Tanya, and this is the brisa that Abaye found, machatzeles hakonim, when you have a reed mat, big gedolah, if it's large, misachechin ba. Again, the advantage of large is that since to begin with, a reed mat is uncomfortable. It was made for reclining. On top of that, if it was made for it to be used as a hammock or as a bed or something for people to lay upon or to lean upon or to sit upon, you wouldn't make it that large. People don't need such a large mat. However, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, before we go on, clearly we see that Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is regarding a large mat. Number two, listen to the words and listen to what he doesn't say. Let's read in between the lines. So Rabbi Eliezer Omer, im einoi mekabelas tuma, if it's not mekabel tuma, only then it could be used. What is he trying to say with that? He's trying to emphasize that if you don't know that it's einoi mekabelas tuma, because you don't know what the intent was of the one who made it, then you have to assume, even by stama, that it was made l'shchiva. Gewaldik. And therefore, Ella Amar Rav Papa, that you're right. Let's go the opposite way, and everything will fit now. Biketana kula alma lepliga, that if stama l'shchiva. Now, if you know that this was made to be used as a covering to provide shelter, or I mentioned now many times it's made to be some sort of fence, as long as it's not used for anything to be put upon it, then you can use it. But if you don't know, the onus is to prove that it's good. Stam, you have to assume that shchita, and everyone agrees with that. And let's come back, guys, to our reed mats. Let's go back. That's why The many people want for their mats that we use today in the Sukah for it to be made by Jewish manufacturers, by Yidden, by Fruma people that we know they made it for schach. Then it's Havada okay. Ki pligi, the machlokes is dafka v'gedoyla. And again, what gedoyla, when you don't know what the intention was, the Tanach is taka lenient, as we learned in our Mishnah, as we began the Gemara yesterday on the Mishnah, and it fits in the words of the Tanach that stam gedoyla, we presume that it was made l'sichuch, and therefore it's okay. And on this, Rabbi Eliezer holds no, that even if it's only stam, we also have to presume that it was made to be laid upon, and therefore it may not be used. The only time you can use a reed mat is when it's big, and you know what it was made for, and you know it was made l'sichuch, then you can use it for schach. And by the way, the Rosh says so explicitly, only by gedoyla, only when you know, implying that if it's ketana, so says the Rosh, but your intention doesn't even count, and we're going to be machmer. So paskins the Rosh. And by the way, now this answers the question that we began today's shiur with. That's why Rabbi Eliezer dafka goes in that order. It's good to remember this. Achas ketana v'achas gedoyla. He dafka mentions the scenario where it's milsa the pshitale, because there was no machlokes in it. And then the second scenario is the scenario that he's being machadish and being machalek on the Tanach. There's one problem. The problem is, how do we understand the words of Rabbi Eliezer? This was the diyukum we began the Gemara with yesterday, when Rabbi Eliezer says that if it was made l'shchiva, it's not good. You just told me that Rabbi Eliezer holds even stam is not good. That was the problem we had. So the Gemara says, Hachi Ka'amar, we must read in this clause in the Mishnah that stam asiyasa nami l'shchiva, that even if you don't know what the intention was, the presumption has to be that it was made l'shchiva. But there's going to be one scenario that we could be lenient l'Rabbi Eliezer by a large mat. Ad da'avid l'sichuch. If it's large and it was made l'sichuch, then you can use it for schach. And again, the Rosh says from this line in the Gemara, but if it was small, but you know it was made for sichuch, but it's small. And since most people will taka use it for reclining, so he's machmer by understanding here that batla daitli eitzel b'nei adam, and your intention won't even help. Okay. Guys, from here until the end of the Perek, a lot more scenarios and nuances regarding a reed mat or other sorts of similar materials that are made out of kanim, made out of reeds, or made out of other types of plants, and to see whether they will be valid for schach or not. Tanach Rabbanan, we learned in a brayso. Machatzeles, if you have a mat, either that's made out of shifa or gemi. Guys, we had this just a few daf ago. These are different type of plants that are in the rush family. They are a lot softer than reeds. That's the nekuda. Softer means that it's more possible that they were made to be reclined upon. So says the Braisa, gid doila, if it's large, misachachin ba. Yes, we presume that it was made, even though it's soft. But since it's large, then we presume that it was not made to be reclined upon. Ketana, but if it's small, and here it's not more than the case of the reed mat, then ein misachachin ba, because they're taka more comfortable. Fakert, we have to presume that it was made to be reclined upon. Furthermore, says the Braisa, what happens if the material of the mat is harder? So that will be a mat that's made out of either kanim, made out of reeds, or vishel chilos, or if it's made out of sedge. Also, these are plants that are harder than the shifa and the gemi. Now, Chevre, here is where many people get confused. Here, even though we keep on speaking about gedoyla and ketana, just to know this is not gedoyla, but it's gedula. This is very important. Gedula means that another indicator, a new thing, we never mentioned this until now, is that how were these raw plants made into a thing, into an item? So were they braided or were they woven? Interesting. When you braid, then the final product is less comfortable to recline upon because it's not smooth, right? It goes up, it goes down. It's like it's going to hurt you. So if it's gedula, now that's great when it comes to our topic. No, it's the less comfortable, the more we are allowed to presume it was not made to be laid upon, to be reclined upon. So gedula, so here you have two positives. You can say it's two negatives, but two positives for Hilchos Sukah. Aleph, the material itself is hard, it's kanim, it's reeds. It's definitely harder than shifa and gemi. Number two, it was braided. So the mesachin. But this kind of holds, even if it's kanim, if it's aruga, if it's woven, which makes the final product more comfortable relative to the braided, then even though it's large, ein mesachin ba. And by the way, this sounds very much like the shita of Rabbi Eliezer according to Rav Papa's understanding, which is also...
Rabbi, why do I care if it's comfortable to sit on or not? Don't I want something strong enough to be schach? If I put something that's too soft or too fragile, it's going to make holes over Yontif.
Oh, we're not even focused on that, Semach. Let's go before that. If you put schach and it becomes holy, I just want to go to answer directly what you're saying. If you remember, we learned the machlokes b'shamai and b'silo, whether a sukkah is only kosher if it actually is made and stands for 7 days, which is the sheet of b'shamai. If you don't subscribe to that, who cares? You know, we're city boys. We don't have schach. If you're living out there in the Catskills where tzemach is, every day you can put new schach. No problem. I just want to make sure that whatever I'm putting while it's there is kosher. That's a good thing. You see the final product. Now, Rabbi Shmuel, but Rabbi Yossi says, in the name of his father, which is in the name of Rabbi Yossi, no, he's more lenient. Again, it mamish fits with the flow because we don't paskin like Rabbi Eliezer. Achazu. Guys, we're speaking here about, let's go with something that's large, because we're beginning shalkanam, even large, then mesachin ba. No, I'll go better. Achazu means both, whether it's braided or whether it's woven. Achazu also means, whether it's small, whether it's large. The very fact that it's made out of a material that is hard, then we presume it was not made to be reclined upon. All of this is by stomach. Now, if you know what it was made for, then no one is going to debate. Then it's going to be a keli, and it's going to be puzzle for schach. And which is a huge leniency when it comes to sukkah. Again, achazu means both, whether it's braided, whether it's woven, whether it's large, whether it's small. The presumption is it was not made for reclining. Guys, remember this shita, and it's gavaldik. In other words, not only do we have a hemshech hadvarim, dafka the way we explained Rabbi Eliezer, which is why these latter Tanoim are lenient, because we don't paskin like Rabbi Eliezer. But now that we understand, now that we have the shita of Rab Doisa, now we're going to have a potential problem with the following. And now let's move on by it. So Tanan Hassan, and we're going be'inyan le'inyan. It's mamash, we have this on Amud Aleph. Again, we'll have this in the beginning of Pedig Beis. Today on Amud Beis, we have dinim of roofs as they relate to Tumantara, which is that when you have a corpse, whether it is from anyone or according to the Rashbi, only of Atem Kareim Adam, and you have enough of the corpse, of course, the entire corpse, or Kazai is busted from the corpse, of Roiv Minyan, of Roiv Binyan, of the Atzomis of the corpse, or the Shidra, or the Gulgoilas, v'chule, v'chule. If you have a source of a corpse that's big enough to convey tumas oil, or I'll go back. I take back tumas oil, guys. It's later. We want to know whether you have an item that's considered a keli. If something is not considered a keli, it will not be susceptible to becoming tummy. On top of that, there are certain people that they are able to convey tumas mishkav umayshav, or tumas midras, which means that if there is an item that was made to be reclined upon, to be sat upon, to be laid upon, then not only will it acquire tuma if there was halachic contact, I'm speaking about any type of contact, but furthermore, if taka someone like a nida, like a zava, a yeledis, and a metzoida will sit or lay upon that item, they will convey to that item tuma that we call tumas midras. The item will become just as tummy as them. It will also be a av. So now we want to know, how do we view a choitzolos? Now, to begin with, we don't know what choitzolos means, and we'll have a machlokes amoraim what it means. one opinion will hold that it means a mat. But let's wait before we interpret the word for a couple of lines. But whatever chaytzolois is, the Tanach holds that it's considered a keli enough that mitamin tamemes, that it's susceptible. It means it's susceptible to becoming tame on the level of tumas meis. But what the Tanach is implying, that it was not made to be sat upon or to be reclined upon, it will not become tame b'tumas midras. Which means, let's say, if you have the zava that's going to sit on it, well, if there is contact, then it will become tame, because the zava is an av, and the item will become a rishon, but it will not acquire the level of av. Divrei Rabbi Doisa, the Chachamim say more lechumra, that midras. Now, really, there's a rule for any item that could become tame, even on the level of midras, for sure will acquire tuma through maga or masa or oil. So normally the wordings should have been even midras. In this Mishnah Neiduyos, we don't have the word af. So it's mashma that the Chachamim are saying only midras, but not any other tuma, and that's a problem. What, only midras and tamei meis loy? That can't be, because we have another rule. And according to this Mishnah from Nida, v'hanan tanam kol hametame midras, if any item is that susceptible, that it's even susceptible to tumas midras, then for sure metame tamei meis, and not the other way around. So indeed, we have to add a word over here in the Mishnah, ema af midras. Okay, so now we have it clear. So chaytzalois is considered a keli. No one is debating that. But there was a machloikas between Abdoisa and the Chachamim. Abdoisa holds it's a keli, but we don't view it as an item that was made for reclining. It will not acquire tumas midras, and the Chachamim are machber. Now, what is my chaytzalois? So here we go. Omar Rab Avdimi Bar Hamdurei. He gives a word that is also not that familiar, that chaytzalois means marzoivle. And there was a certain time that resolved the question. That resolved the problem. But the Gemara says that you didn't help me. My marzoivle. So here, Amar Rebbe Abba mizable. Mizable means some sort of leather bags. Now, these were leather bags that shepherds de facto would use when they are out in the fields, when their work was needed, when their observation was needed, but they got lazy. They would use it as a pillow. They would go down to rest. And these shepherds were not encouraged to completely, go to sleep while they're out there in the fields. Who knows what's going to happen with the sheep? So now you can understand why, on one hand, you can say the leather bag was used for many things, to carry things, but can you also say that the leather bag was made for reclining, when really a shepherd should not go recline on it? That's why it's subject to the machlokes. However, Rav Shimon ben Lakish says, no. Go to the root, right? Chaytzalois comes from the same shaytas as that machtzalois mamish. Machtzalois means real mats, the topic that we're talking about. And now we're going to see how mats, now you see the link, not too much, I take that back, how mats, well, they're definitely considered a keli. They might even be considered something made for reclining. And the Omer Ish Lakish, and Ish Lakish is going to quote a statement of his teacher, Rabbi Chia, and Rabbi Chia's children, and he happened to be quoting this within 12 months of the passing of his teacher. And we had this also in Kedushin, that both a son for a parent and a Talmud for a Rav, when they are quoting their teacher within the 12 months, they add Hareini Kaparas. We say Hareini Kaparas Mishkavai. You find this in all of the letters of the Rebbe within the year of the passing of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Hareini Kaparas Reb Chia Ubanov. Rashi, 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid, that if, God forbid, there are certain amounts of Yisurim that are needed to be brought about upon the one who passed away, so the Talmud or the child is saying, let it go on me. And Veloshin Kavait Huzeh, Shuhu Maskir Avavay Rabbi La'achar Misasoi Tzorich Loy Markein, again, Kedushin Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Beis, that's the whole sugya of kibbud avayim, how kibbud avayim doesn't end just because the parent physically passed on, etc. Okay, so now, what is this Lakish saying? So he begins just to introduce the greatness of his teacher, and the greatness of the teacher was that there were certain halachas that every now and then were forgotten, and the great yid that remembered it, that brought it back, mamash, the greatest thing in the world. Just like you have that kol hamatzel nefesh achas mi Yisrael, it's as if he saved an entire world. We look at the same way when it comes to halachas, especially Torah Shebal Peh, especially at the time prior for it being recorded the way Rabbeinu HaKadosh did and all his contemporaries, with the Braisas, with the Safra, with the Safri, etc. So what happened? So he writes like this: there were certain halachas that were forgotten, and that's Allah, Ezra bin Babel v'Yista, and Ezra brought it back. Now, guys, if you remember, we learned this in Kedushin, that when the original Yidden that lived in Babel went back to Eretz Yisrael, they weren't necessarily the most learned ones. So therefore, in Eretz Yisrael, there were certain halachas that were not known, they were forgotten. And when Ezra came back, he reminded everyone. He brought back the entirety of the Torah. And many generations went by, this man by Yesheni, and v'chazra v'nishtakha, and certain halachas were forgotten. And Rashi in the bottom, the last Rashi in the Amud reminds us, we just learned this in Psachim, Daf Samach Vav. Remember, the Gemara Nach writes over there that there was a time that the leaders of the Yidden were B'nai B'Seira, and Nis'alma, right? Halachazu Nis'alma mi B'nai B'Seira. That's the Gemara in Psachim. They wanted to know, like a simple thing, when the 14th day of Nisan falls on Shabbos, they Pasha didn't remember whether Pesach overrides Shabbos or not. Remember, that's the way Hillel became the leader. And Allah, Hillel Habavli, and V'yista. And then Chazar v'Nishtakha and Alu Rabbi Chiobana v'Yizduam, and they reestablished. Now, again, we're not speaking about, God forbid, the whole Torah being forgotten. We're speaking about even one detail of a halakha, but that's for us the whole Torah. Now, what was forgotten that was reestablished by Rabbi Chiobana? That the Chain Amid Rabbi Chiobana, this we're going to answer the Amid, Lo Nechleku Rabdoise v'Chachamim. So we have the Mishnah in a Duyos. Now again, there's a machlekes amayraim what chaytzolos means. This is all Reish Lakish proving that his statement is correct. But we have a machlekes regarding Rabdois is more lenient, right? It only becomes Tamei Meis, but not Tumas Midrash. The Chachamim say even Midrash, and from the way Rab Chia explained, it's clear that the case of the Mishnah, the chaytzolos is pashat metz. That al machatzolois shel usha, clearly. So there were the mats that were typically made and used in the city of Usha. Regarding that mat, there was no debate of Chaf Amid Beis, that what? Sheheim Tameis, that they are Tamei. Meaning both Rabdoise and the Chachamim hold that they are Tamei even on the level of Midrash. Why is that? Because they were relatively softer, and it was common that in Usha such mats were made Lishchiva. So you have to look at the location, that it was made in this location. And most people here use these mats, and therefore they make the mats for reclining. So the presumption was it's made for reclining. And how that's negeya to Hilchas Tumantara is that it even acquires Tumas Midas. In mats, weiter, this is what Rabbi Chiobana reminded everyone. If they were made in Tiveria, and Ashi writes Tiveria, those mats, the material were much harder, and therefore it wasn't comfortable for people to lay upon them. So yes, it's a keli. We'll see in a moment. It was made for a use, but not to be reclined upon. So it's not going to acquire Tumas Midas. Alma nechleku. So where's the machlokes? This is all Rabbi Chiobana. Al shar mekoymos, mats that came from all other places. But okay. So now Marsav Rabbeisa holds Kiven the Leke the Yosef Alayu. They're not hard. They were not hard. They were not made physically like they were made in Tiveria. But most people don't recline upon them. So therefore is ki the Tveria Damian, and therefore they should not acquire Tumas Midrash. That's exactly what Rab Doisa says in the Mishnah in Eiduyas. Omar, so the Chachamim hold, since they're physically not hard, And kiven the mikre samachtach. It happens that yes, the yosvi alayo, that people sit on it or people recline on it. So therefore, kid usha damyen. So we, if some people use it and it was made, you can't say it was not made also for reclining. The material is the iked over here according to the sheet of the chachamim, and therefore it even will acquire tumas midras. And now we're going to bring all that back to our din over here by Sukah. So Amar Mar, coming back to what we just taught, that kol hachoitzolois, first Tana was Rabdoisi, mitamen to memeis, divri Rabdois. And now you get the link. So asks the Gemara, didn't you just quote to me a braisa? And at the ending was, v'hatanya v'chein hoya Rabdoisa said, kidvarav, that what? He ruled like Rabbi Yossi. I mean, Rabbi Shmuel quoted this father, but the memra comes out of the sources. And what does Rabbi Yossi hold? That all reed mats, reeds or sedge, remember, large or small, braided or woven, they are all valid for schach. You got the problem? Why are they valid for schach? Because he paskins that they, stama, were not made to be reclined upon. And I'll tell you more than that. It's not only that they were not made to be reclined upon, for them to be kosher, they were not viewed as kalim at all. If they're not viewed as kalim at all, if they are not utensils, so then how can you use it for schach? That's a great question. True, Rabdoisi doesn't hold that it's tamei tumas midras, but Rabdoisi holds that it's a keli in eduyos. And if it's a keli, how can it ever be kosher schach? Gevaldik answers the Gemara like kasha. Ha, meaning the Mishnah in eduyos is the isle gedafna. It has a rim. A rim indicates that it was made to hold something. It was not made to be reclined upon, but it was made to be makabel something. And what's important when it comes to using a reed mat for schach or not is not only whether it was made for someone to lay on it. If it was made to be a container, even though it's pshutei kleyates, it has a din of a keli, and therefore it's going to be invalid for schach. And indeed, if you have any type of mat that has a rim, then it's matame tamei meis. It's susceptible, and therefore it may not be used for schach. Now, when we learned on Amud Aleph that Rabdoisa paskins kidvarav, which is like Rabbi Yossi, that's because they were speaking about a reed mat, the lace legedafn. If it doesn't even have a rim, it was not made to be a container at all. Forget about no one is going to read. It was not made to be a container. If it's not made to be a container, even though it was made to be a cover, doesn't matter. That is 100% a kosher schach. And this will be a kasha now on Reish Lakish's understanding of the case of the Mishnah and Eduyos. Says in a braisa, choitzolois, if it shall sham v'shal gemi, again, if it's made out of rush plants. Again, here's the word choitzolois. That's the machloikas, what it means. Or v'shal sak, if it's made out of goat hair, or if it's made out of sfira. Interesting usage of the word of sfira. Sfira here means horse hair. So in all of the cases, says the Tanakama, says Rabdoisi, metame tamei meis, divrei Rabdoisi. In other words, it's taka not going to acquire tumas midras, but yes, we always view them as kelim. V'chachamim oimrim, like we had in the Duyos, af midras. And here again, the word is choitzalois. So now the Gemara says like this, Bishloim elamanda omar, which was Rav Avdimi, if you remember, that the case of choitzalois is marzoivli, these types of shepherd bags. And here we are speaking about a machloikis, whether it's for sure tamei meis, maybe even also midras. We have to understand what use do people have from it. So he explains that shall sham v'shal gemi, even though that they are very hard raw material, and therefore you cannot tightly weave them together, and whatever you'll have will be something that is very porous. Doesn't matter. You can still say not only that it's a keli, but according to the Chachamim, it's going to become tomei medras, because chazi lekinta the peri, because it's suitable to store in it large produce. It cannot be tightly woven, but you can make it into a bag for what? For items that are very big. And even if the keli, so to say, is porous, it won't fall out. It will be able to hold on to it. And then when the Braisa gave examples of sak and safira, which from that you can make a keli that is tightly woven, oh, then chazul, it's being used, ligulke v'tzanei, it's being used for different types of long pouches, for different types of sacks in which you can store small items, beans or grains. Bottom line is, all of these raw materials can be used to make a keli, minimally a keli, according to Rabdoisi. Taka not made to be laid upon, but yes, it's considered a proper receptacle. But according to Reish Lakish, that teaches that the case of the choitzolis means machzolis mamish, mats, pashut mats. So bishlem mishal sak v'shal safira. Why would people make mats out of those materials, out of goat's hair, out of horse hair? Because such a mat will be able to be used as a parsei, as a curtain, or as a naf, vasa, as a sieve. But elo shel sham v'shel gemin, right? So and we said that according to the Abdoisi, these items are not made to be reclined upon. So if it's not made to be reclined upon, and they're very coarse, and you can't put anything on it without it falling through, lamai chazu, what would they make it for? You make it for a curtain. You're not going to make a curtain that has very large holes. It's not going to serve its purpose. So the Gemara says it's not true. That even when the raw material is very coarse and you cannot tightly weave it, but chazul in iziyasa, they still can be used to cover certain brewing vats. You can go with Reish Lakish and you can understand how it can be considered a keli enough for it to be mekabel, like Rabbi Doisa holds, to mace. It's susceptible to becoming tummy, not Midrash, but to mace. Ikadamri, other people use this brisa to ask Pungfaket, that they said Bishlem, according to Reish Lakish, who says that the case is choitzolois, which means machzolis, mamash rats, mats. So Shalsham v'shal gemi, it was already a pshita for them. Chazal and ziyasa, yeah, people would make certain types of mats in order to cover large vats. And v'shal sak v'shal safira, because it can be used leparsei for curtains, v'nafefasa and for sieves. In other words, all of the above are considered halachic utensils that certainly can become susceptible to mace. But according to the Manda Amr, which is Rav Avdimi, that the case of choitzolis is marzoivle are certain types of shepherd bags. So bishlem v'shal sak v'shal safira chazu legulke v'tzani, right? Since the material is, you can tightly weave it, so that you can make bags or you can make pouches in order to store grains and beans. It won't fall out. Elo shel sham v'shel gemi. Lamai chazu, why would they make it for? So the Gemara answers over here that chazu lekitna de peri. You can make it for different types of bags that will be used to store large produce. I don't care if the bag is very porous, since the produce itself is even larger, it will not fall out. It, yes, will be contained. And therefore, again, yes, all of them at least have a din of a keli that's susceptible to tumas meis. Says the Gemara, Tanya, we learned, Amar Rabbi Hananya, that kishiyaradati l'goyla, when I went into the diaspora, when I went from Eretz Yisrael, I visited Golos. Matzasi Zakanechad, I found an elder. For Amar Li, and he told me that Mesachachin bebudya, guys, in outside Eretz Yisrael, a mat was called a budya, that you can use a mat for schach. In other words, you can presume that it was not made for reclining because it's not comfortable. Could be it Pashat people hidden outside Eretz Yisrael are used to a more comfortable lifestyle, perhaps. So the given in Chutz La'aretz is that no one is going to recline on a reed mat. For sure, you can use it for schach. And when I, Rabbi Hananya, came to my uncle, to my father's brother, Rabbi Yeshua, and I told him that when I went to Goyla, I heard this from the Zaken Echad, he says he's right. Amar Rab Chizda, putting a nuance that we learned today, when can we presume that it was not made for reclining? The lace-legged dafna, that it has no rim. It's weaker. If it has a rim, then you can't be stam that it was made l'sichuch. Maybe it was made for reclining. Amar Ula, another statement similar, that Hani Budiyasa, again, another name for mats, that are made in the village or in the city of Mechuzah, the Bnei Mechuzah, ilmole kir shalehem, if not for the fact that they put rims on it, I would also paskin that you can use it mesachachin behu. And indeed, Tanya Namihachi, the final halacha, that mesachachin bebudya, you are allowed to use mats, but the im yesh lahem kir, if they have a rim, ein mesachachin bohem. Just to know that al pi beruchnius, a rim is something that's coarse. So if the arum is coarse, then you're not a kosher schach. Speaking beruchnius, that schach has in it a very high level of godliness. Maki from the bina. We had in the beginning of the first Perek that we compared the schach mamish to the kruvim that are on top of the Aron HaKodesh. And Chevra, with this we say Hadran Allah Sukah. We'll come back to you to the first Perek, and we're going to move on with the second Perek. We will still have in the second Perek some more scenarios that describe the walls and the technical details of how we are to make a sukkah, and starting with the third chapter, just to go to Seder HaInyanim. Then we're going to move on to the dinim of the Daled Minim. So this is the second and the final chapter that's going to continue to speak about halachis about the sukkah. And as we mentioned in the introduction, that even when you have yourself a kosher sukkah, if there is a halachic oil in the sukkah and you are in the oil, you're under the oil, that's a problem. Because the oil creates a chatzitza, it interposes between the person in it and the sukkah itself, and thus you will not be fulfilling the mitzvah of dwelling in the sukkah. And the example the Mishnah will begin with is hayoshein tachas hamita basukkah. You have a kosher sukkah and you have a bed, and I will clarify further in the Gemara, according to Shmuel, that this is dafka if the bottom of the bed is 10 tfachim or more over the ground, and a person is decided to sleep under the bed. What's the issue? Even though the bed was made for the top, do we view under the bed as an area that's in a oil, which will be problematic? And indeed, the Tanach holds that lo yotze yedei chavasei, because the bottom of the bed does create some sort of roof and shelter, which creates a chatzitza, and therefore you're not dwelling in the sukkah. Concerning the din of sleeping in the sukkah, you're not sleeping in the sukkah. And the Tana, Rabbi Yehuda argues. Rabbi Yehuda, no, hagi no yinu. No, it was common by us that we would sleep under the beds, and not stam. We would sleep in front of the great sages, and and they did not say boo. In other words, it's very important that silence is tantamount to consent. If what we would have been doing would not have been okay, then they should have made a protest. Rabbi Shimon, not like Rabbi Yehuda, yes, like the Tanakh says, no. You want to bring a Maisa, I'll bring you another Maisa. That Maisa, B'Tavi Avdei Shel Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Shimon says that it once happened that Tavi was a Canaanite Eved of Rabbi Gamliel. And we know from many other places, including here, that he was a tremendous scholar and he was meticulous in his observance of the mitzvahs. Now, an Eved is obligated to keep the mitzvahs like women are obligated. And one of the rules we have in Kedushin is that if there are all the negative commandments, even a mitzvah saseh, it depends. The rule is that if you have a positive commandment, shehazman gerama, that's time bound, they are exempt from it. And for sure, that includes the mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah, of dwelling in the sukkah for the 7 days of sukkahs. So Tavi, the Eved of Rabbi Gamliel, that he shehoya yoshan tachas hamita, he would sleep under the bed, and v'amarahem, his master, which is Rabban Gamliel, to the Zekenim, that reisem Tavi avdi. Take a look at my Eved Tavi. He was proud of him that he's a Talmud Chacham. And he knows she'avodim peturim in asukah because it is a mitzvah saseh shazman geroma, and he added the words, and that's why he sleeps under the mita. And what was he really implying? Says the Mishnah, what he's implying is ulafi darachenu or darkenu lamadnu, in passing. In other words, by implication, we learn that only an Eved is allowed to sleep under the mita, not like you, Rabbi Yehuda. Yes, Rabbi Shimon says, like the Tanakh, that what? That shahayoshin tachas hamita lo yotza yedei chayvasoi. So here we have a machlokes. Are you allowed to sleep under the bed? Are you not allowed to sleep under the bed? Are you dwelling in the sukkah, whether you're not dwelling in the sukkah? Now the problem is, And this kasha is both on the Tanakama and on Rabbon and on Rabbi Shimon. Stam Rabbi Shimon is the Rashbi. How can you be machman? How can you say it's not good? It doesn't make sense. The standard bed or some beds are not 10 tfachim tall. We're speaking about the area under the bed. And let's word it this way. The fact that the Mishnah categorically says that which will also include even a bed that's under 10 tfachim, the premise of the question is that if the area under the bed is not even 10 tfachim tall, don't forget, guys, again, that the bed wasn't even made for the bottom. We had this a lot in Perek Aleph. So that should not be considered, not according to any opinion, as an oil. And why would there be a problem? And indeed, Shmuel needed to interpret the Mishnah that our Mishnah is only speaking about b'mita asara, that the open space under the bed is 10 tfachim or more. That makes that area to be considered a more important area, for which, yes, we will view the bottom of the bed as an oil. And now the person is in an oil, which creates the chatzitza. Okay, so now that we have a clear machlokas here by Sukah, let's begin now. Here is where we go, my friends, to speak about the dinim of an oil as it relates to tumas oil. So when you have a corpse or part of the corpse, like we mentioned in the wrong place, but let's just quickly repeat it. If you have the entire corpse, if you have a kazais b'sarames, if you have roiva atzamais, and the roiv minyan, roiv binyan, or the chedra, or the shidra, or the golgoilas, if you have enough of a mace that is able to convey tumas oil, then indeed anything that's under the same roof becomes tummy. Guys, really don't forget that tumas oil is a three-way. There's a three-way application to oil. Either, let's say, if you have a mace and there's another item that's susceptible to becoming tummy, goes above the mace. The item is mahil over the mace, that's tumas oil, or the other way around, or the mace is over the item, or they are both under a sheared roof. And what this Mishnah that we're going to quote from Aliyah will be speaking about is going to be a roof that was not made for roof. It was not made to provide shade and shelter. And that will particularly be by a natural roof. So tonight we learned over there in Aliyah. Echad chur shecharuruhu mayim. That if you have a hollowed area, what hollowed it out? Not a person. Water hollowed it out, which means it was not made for intent. It happened naturally. Or shiratzim, or it was burrowed by different types of shiratzim that ate up a certain, and they created a crevice in the ground. Oisha acholatu melachas, or some sort of corrosive minerals, or literally salt, so to say, corroded an area and created a pocket. Oy midbach havana, if you have a pile of stones, v'chein savvar shel koides, you have a stack of beams. In all of these cases, right now, there is an area that has a oil over it. In all of these cases, mahil ala tuma, it all constitutes an oil. And if you have the source, if you have the corpse, or enough of it, and any other item that is susceptible to be mekabel tuma under this covering, yes, that's pshat, a proper oil. So holds the Tanakama. However, Rabbi Yehuda says, this is his klal, kol oil she'enoi asu bidei adam, if an oil was not made by man. And Rashi, the last line of the Amid, adds a very important line. It has to be made by man. It has to be made by man with intent. Look inside the last line in Rashi. Mischavin la'asoy soy oil. Needed to be made with the intent to form a shelter. Obviously, if it was not made by men, there was no intent at all. But even if it's made by man, it needed to be made for an oil. If it was not that, then it's not an oil. And Rashi writes the last line of the last Rashi in the Amid. L'tuma. Guys, we're going to come back tomorrow on Daf Chaf Aleph from Tuma back to Sukah. We have a machlekes. Let's at least begin over here. What's the source? What's the reason of Rabbi Yehuda that holds that if it was not made bidei adam l'shem with kavana la'asoy soy oil, it's not an oil. Daf Chaf Aleph. Pashut, he has exedeh shalom. Yalef, oil from the Mishkan. It says over here, what's the source of tumas oil in the Chumash? Parshas Chukas, Zois HaTorah, Adam Kiyamus Ba'oil. Right, that's the Chazal, that you only acquire Torah if you have to be Yamus Ba'oil. You have to give it all away in the oil of Torah. But Al Pip Shat is oil. And it says over there, where's over there in Pashas Pekudei regarding the oil, the Mishkan, the tabernacle, Vayiferois, Eso oil ala Mishkan, they spread the tent over the Mishkan. If you remember, we learned there were achlekes, whether there were 3 coverings, whether there were 4 coverings, and the names for each one. So the covering that's called an oil was spread over the Mishkan. Oh, now over there, we built the Mishkan. In other words, Ma'alahalan, it was Bidei Adam and Taka, the way Rashi says. It wasn't just made Bidei Adam, it was made to cover the inside of the oil moed. Afkan, whenever the whole Torah, the whole parsha of Tumas oil is only when it's Bidei Adam, made by men with the intent for a covering. Now, 1 second, V'Rabbanan, you're right. V'Rabbanan say that had the Torah not repeated the word oil many times in Parshas Chukas, then I would have said the same thing. But the fact that the Torah repeats the words oil many times, that's being marabed, that as long as it de facto creates a shade or a shelter, it will be included in the dinim of Tumas oil. We'll stop over here. God willing, to be continued. Today was
Thank
easy.
you. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thank you, Rabbi.